Welcome to Growth Beyond Boundaries, the podcast by the Astra Coach Alliance that explores the transformative power of coaching, leadership, and innovation. I'm your host, Andy Huckaba, and I'm so excited to have you join us. Here at the Astra Coach Alliance, we believe growth isn't just a goal, it's a journey. Whether you're a leader striving to inspire your team, a professional seeking your next breakthrough, or an organization ready to transform your culture, this podcast is for you. Each segment, we bring you stories, strategies, and insights from our team of seasoned coaches and leaders across industry. Together, we'll discover innovative approaches to fostering a culture built on success, accountability, and collaboration, rooted in both challenging and compassionate coaching practices. So if you're ready to go beyond boundaries and discover what's possible, you're in the right place. Let's get started. Over the last two episodes, episode 31, where we explored what burnout is and how it affects us, and episode 32, where we examine how leadership and organizational systems can either contribute to burnout or build resilience. We've spent time understanding this growing challenge from several different angles. And today we'd like to shift our focus from understanding burnout to finding a path beyond it. If you've recognized yourself somewhere in these conversations, or maybe recognize someone you care about, the question becomes, now what? How do we begin to move forward? And how do we recover from burnout? How do we practice leadership in ways that are healthier and more sustainable for ourselves and for the people around us? We believe there's hope, and today we're going to explore what that journey can look like. I'm joined today by Teresa Schwab, a partner in the Astra Coach Alliance and an MCC coach. Welcome, Teresa.
Hi, Andy. Good to be here today.
Good to have you again. And I have a question to start us off. If someone listening today realizes that they've been experiencing burnout, where does the path forward begin? What do you think, Teresa?
Well, it's a great question. I think we've had two really nice conversations about burnout and really understanding what it is, what it feels like, and really giving people some hope that it's possible to get out of burnout feels really helpful and supportive. And I love the idea of the metaphor of the path. When I think about the path, for me, it's always about what's the end goal. So the path as a metaphor is really helpful because we can stop and say, what do I want at the end of the path? If I continue down this path or if I continue on a path, ultimately, where would I love for that path to lead? So starting with the end in mind feels really helpful because then you can stop and say, okay, what kind of life do I want to lead? What kind of person do I want to be when I leave work, when I'm with my family and for my community? How do I want to feel about myself at the end of the day? How do I want to feel when I go home to my kids? What do I really care about and what do I really value? So that starting with the end in mind gives you some data or some information about then what are the first steps that I should take.
And that sounds like really deep reflection, a personal reflection that somebody should go through as they're working through that.
Absolutely. And that deep reflection requires a few things. Like, I don't think most of us, when we're in I'm going to change metaphors. If we're in the stream and the stream is swiftly moving and taking us down the stream, it's hard to get out of it. You're just scrambling. You're trying to stay alive. You're trying to keep your head above water and get a breath and not get hit by a tree, all those things that are sweeping you
Sure.
along.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what happens when we're at work, and especially when we're feeling burnt out, is we're just like in this stream being swept away. And that pause requires some work. It requires like really struggling to try to find a safe place to land. Maybe it's a limb, or maybe it's a rock, or maybe it's something that you got to grab onto so that you can take a break. And
Right.
that intentionality is really hard when you're in the stream. It requires some additional work. And sometimes it's hard to see. We've talked about how hard it is to see, what that burnout might be, even. Is it just that I'm not enjoying my life? Am I depressed? Is it something I'm doing wrong? Am I not working hard enough? Or is this something else? But until we take a pause to really sort those things out and do that reflection that you just talked about, it's really hard to know. But if you think about that metaphor of a
Yeah.
stream, it takes a lot of extra effort to sort of
Yes.
swim to get to something safe so that you can take a breath and catch your breath.
Yeah. So you talk about this idea of, you didn't name it, but I'll name it for us because we've named it certainly in episode 31, purpose. That lack of
Uh-huh.
purpose sometimes, or that losing sight of our purpose sometimes causes people to go down the path, back to that metaphor, to go down the
Hmm.
path of burnout, right? They lose confidence
Hmm.
that they can make progress toward this fuzzy purpose that isn't really well established in them anymore. Um, and I think those things contribute. And so you talk about the pause, this ability to pause and to reconnect with your purpose, your why. Why am I doing this? What am I trying to accomplish? What's really meaningful to me, right? And
Absolutely.
and that takes a lot of work, especially when you have the momentum of what got you into the burnout thing to begin with, whether it's the stream or running on the path. There's momentum
Hmm.
involved in this. And the question is what am I running toward, or what am I swimming toward? And that becomes a purpose kind of question.
I absolutely agree with you. And purpose questions can feel really big, but purpose, again, I'm gonna mix up our
Mm,
metaphors. We're gonna use a lot of metaphors today.
we love metaphors.
We do love metaphors. I think purpose is a little bit like a lighthouse. If we don't define what our purpose is, we're just swimming around. But if we can define our purpose, we can use it a little bit like a different metaphor in North Star. So I like the lighthouse metaphor because the lighthouse's purpose is to help ships navigate when things get rocky, when the weather gets complicated and you lose your path. You can always look toward that lighthouse and shift yourself in that general direction. So for humans, us really defining what is our purpose, and maybe purpose feels too big. Maybe we don't go to life purpose because maybe some people are are too overwhelmed by what's my life
Mm.
purpose, but maybe it's more like, what kind of partner do I want to be? What kind of parent do I want to be? What kind of human being do I want to be? So that I can start to question whether I'm
What,
being that kind of person.
yeah, and what kind of impact do I want to have in the environment I'm in?
Absolutely. I
Right.
love that question. What kind of impact do I want to have? What do I want people to feel when they're around me? I think I might have shared this story in maybe the first conversation that we had about burnout, but I had this experience when I was early in my career and I was in a situation where I was feeling like I was in a stream and like all of these things were just sort of carrying me down, and I wasn't quite sure what was going on, and it was impacting the way that I was showing up at home. And it was a 3-day weekend, and the on the Sunday, we were driving somewhere in the car, and the weather was beautiful, and the windows were down, and we were just laughing. And my husband looked at me and he said, "Wow, I haven't seen you smile in a long time." And it was that moment where I didn't have to go to work tomorrow. So I wasn't steeling myself against work, but I truly had sort of let myself enjoy the moment and smiling. And that little bit of feedback just
Mm.
gave me that, like, oh, wow, like this isn't just something I'm experiencing internally. This is something that my family is experiencing. It's experiencing the way that I show up with him. It's experiencing, my children are experiencing it in the way that I show up with them. That was not consistent with who I wanted to be. So those moments or those glimpses of feedback can be like a little bit of an open window where you go, oh, wait a minute, maybe this pause is necessary. Maybe some clarity would be helpful.
Yeah, so our spouses, our partners,
Mhm.
our kids, our
Mhm.
neighbors, the people we know the best can sometimes be vehicles to recognize something in us because they feel safe to make those kind of comments. And
And
if we
sometimes,
just
yeah,
listen, sometimes
yes,
those little bits of information will help kind of slap us back into a realization of I'm off track here. I
yeah,
need to I need to do something different.
absolutely. And I think a lot of times those moments are not intended to be feedback. They're just a natural sort of like in the moment, them
Yeah.
saying something. So they're not trying to give us feedback. But if it hits us, if you haven't like your heart tightens or something inside you goes, whoa, like that's an indicator that something important just happened there. And it can help sort of create that, maybe it's the momentum to actually put that extra spur of effort in to, like, find the rock or the limb or something so that you can get out and take a break.
So one of the tips then is awareness, is to increase your awareness. Be aware of the feedback you're hearing from people you who are closest to you.
Yeah,
Um, and so being truly aware of that, being tuned into that, listening not out of defensiveness, but listening out of desire to understand and to learn, right? Um,
absolutely.
and so that's one of the tips is that awareness, building that awareness and strengthening that. What are some other things we learn from that?
Uh-huh. Well, I love how you took the metaphor and just made it into a concrete tip for people so they know exactly what we're talking about or what they could do.
Yeah.
So, opening yourself up to moments of feedback, raising your level of awareness, and then when you have discovered, if that awareness leads you to, hmm, maybe something's off here. Maybe I need to do some more thinking. I think the next question is to ask yourself some of those questions we talked about earlier. Who do I want to be? What do I want other people to feel like when they're around me? What kind of parent do I want to be? What kind of daughter do I want to be? What kind of friend do I want to be? Am I being that? And then getting clear about, and what kind of impact do I want to have in other people's lives or in my work, and really getting some clarity about that so you create that lighthouse. So those are the first questions. And then if you realize that your path is not taking you
Hmm.
toward your purpose, then that's the moment where some deeper reflection might happen. It's like,
Right.
okay, so why am I off the path? What's leading to me getting off the path? What would it take for me to get back on the path? And asking yourself that kind of question. And I'd love for you to share. We've been talking along the way about some different examples of individuals that we've known or worked with that have made decisions like this, and that I'd love to hear a little bit more from your perspective about that intentional pause and what that pause can actually look like.
Sure. Well, so um, I'm thinking, and we're coaches, so we're not going to name names or anything
Right,
like this. This is
right,
an ethical decision we make, uh, but we'll talk in generality about situations. And so in this case, I'm thinking of someone who was a very high performer, very driven. Um, you know, you asked her to run through a wall and she would do it type of mindset. Um, and as she began to feel the symptoms or experience burnout, the tendency of high performers oftentimes is to run harder, to work
Mm,
harder, to drive. If I just drive through this, that's the narrative, right? I'll get to the other side and it'll be easier. And it doesn't get easier, does it? Because
mm-mm,
it's a downward spiral. And the person um, I'm thinking about finally came to grips with the idea that this path that I'm on right now, that I'm driving so hard, is not the path I want to be on. I'm not sure she knew what path she wanted to be on, but at that point, maybe she did. But um, she ultimately she started having discussions with her bosses, and they were kind of like, "We'll just throw more money at you." And that's wasn't what was driving her. What was driving her was how to make a stronger, more meaningful impact in the area that she was working in. And she ultimately left. Now she had the ability. Everybody has the option to leave. Some people don't feel like they have the option to leave, but they do. That's a decision. She had the option to leave, and she took a significant amount of time off to just kind of regather herself and do some things that spark the creative side of her brain and accomplish some things which were long-term goals that she had for years. And she took some significant time off to just regather herself. And that was an approach that she saw she was on a path. She didn't like where she was going on that path. She started to feel unmotivated, um, beaten down, all of
mm-hmm.
the different things we talked about, what burnout looks like. And she intentionally shifted paths. She said, I want a new path. And this new
Mm-hmm.
path's going to look like this. And in order for me to get to that new path, in her case, she left the organization that she was working on. Now, that's not
Yeah,
the solution for everybody.
right.
And not everybody has the wherewithal to be able to do that. But in her case, she made a dramatic shift and really aligned with what gave her joy, what sparked her, what gave her energy, what was truly forward looking versus what felt like the hamster wheel.
Uh-huh. Yeah, I think that's such a great story. And I love that you highlight not everybody has the privilege to be able to do that. If you've got an hourly worker or somebody who doesn't have the luxury of financial freedom to be able to take a long pause like that, we have to offer options of ways that you can take pause. So even those small pauses might be a day off or a 3-day weekend or a
Right.
4-day weekend, or maybe it's just turning off your phone when you leave the office and you don't check
Hmm.
anything and give yourself some downtime. One of the things that I think is helpful about the pause last conversation we talked about when you're in the culture and you're just swimming in the water, you get totally acclimated to the water. So that pause is part of getting out of the water long enough that you can look at the water as actually water and not
Right.
just your environment, you know. So you can go, wait a minute, that water, when I dip my toe back in it, it's actually pretty cold. It's not as warm as when I left. So it's sort of that objectivity of whatever pause you can get, but that in pause has to be intentional. And that's really hard for people, I think.
It is.
The other thing that I think is important about what you highlight is one of the things we talked about earlier is that the people who get burnout tend to be your highest performers. They tend to be those that go all in, and their nature is to go all in. And if they're feeling like something's not working, their inclination is going to be to drive harder. It's not going to be to take an intentional pause. So in some ways, you have to work against yourself, which is really hard because it's not necessarily the nature. So then I had somebody I worked with many years ago who was very similar to the person that you were just describing. And the thing that gave her pause was not her environment or somebody that was a partner to her, but it was her physician. So she hadn't been feeling really well,
Mm,
but just thought it was because she was driving really hard, that she was working long hours, and she went in for a routine physical, and the doctor looked at her and said, "Did you not know? I mean, with the blood work that we're getting back, you should have been experiencing symptoms. You should have been feeling tired and exhausted." And she said, "Yeah, I am feeling those things, but that I didn't know that it was my body. I thought it was just the work hours."
mm,
So another piece of feedback, right? Like any place you can go, and maybe it is, if you haven't seen a doctor in a really long time, maybe it is going in for an annual physical
right.
and getting some blood work done. And because you lose the ability to even listen to your body and those signals when you're in the midst of all of this burnout. So there are lots of ways, I think, to get an intentional pause in, but I think intentional is the operative word.
Yeah, so you've alluded to a couple different things that point to the need for a partnership, point
Yes.
to the need for someone else, a third party in your life to give you feedback, to listen to you, to stand beside you, to open up potential options, um, and perhaps to provide some sense of accountability. What does that look like? We're coaches. And so we're obviously going to say, well, folks, you need a coach.
Yeah. Well, an external coach is a brilliant idea. Um, we talked about this last time. There are some things about a coaching partnership which are really valuable. Number one, you have it on your calendar and you're going to meet with another human being who is going to give you their full and undivided attention, who is going to be curious about you, who is not going to judge you, who is going to be asking curious questions and reflecting back to you what they're hearing so that you get some external feedback in a way that it's on your calendar and you have it blocked off so you can take that intentional pause. And coaching is extremely beneficial in that way and for that reason. And for those of you who, for whatever reason, don't have the option to work with a coach, it could be a really good colleague who you spend a lot of times in meetings with. Maybe you decide you're going to set a boundary that you're not going to say yes to everything. Maybe you're going to start saying no to some things. And then maybe you're in a meeting and the boss says, "We need somebody to do XYZ." And you go, "Oh, I'll do that. That'd be easy for me to do." And then maybe your colleague after the meeting says, "Hey, what was that? What was that thing
Accountability.
what was that thing you just did in there?
Right.
You literally just said you were going to say no, and then you literally raised your hand, not even taking a beat. I mean,
The high
what
performer. That's
the
what they
high
do.
performer, right? It is what they do. Absolutely. And sometimes setting a boundary is a really hard thing for individuals, but maybe instead of setting a boundary, maybe the goal is, I'm just going to leave some silence. If somebody says, "Who would like to do this?" or "This thing needs to be done," rather than immediately jumping in, maybe I say to myself, I'm going to force myself to pause for 10 seconds
Yeah.
and just see what happens and see if somebody else steps in. And if somebody else steps in, great. There are some baby steps that I think high performers can take.
So pauses can be micropauses.
Yes, I love
Before
that.
you
Yes,
before you react, before you answer, you pause, right? A
absolutely.
couple things are happening from a neurological standpoint, right? That when you react, you're primarily coming from your amygdala, your fight, flight, or freeze response. You're jumping on something. When you pause, you're coming from your prefrontal cortex, which is your thought thing that creates associations. It creates it's where the logic comes from. It's where the connections come from, and it's where we understand options. And so that pause from a neurological standpoint gives us that opportunity to think, maybe I'm not the best person to do this, or
Mm.
I did actually um, ask my partner or my coach or whatever to keep me accountable to not always jumping forward on things, not always reacting to things. And you have to get into the prefrontal cortex to even have those kind of thoughts. And so the
Mhm.
pause gives you that. That's kind of a
Mhm.
micro pause. But let's talk about longer pauses. What form do those take? And you
Mhm.
mentioned, well, a day off, a weekend here, but what if that's not enough?
Yeah, I think first of all you have to look at what's realistic for you. And if you're in a situation that you don't have the privilege to take a really long paid pause, then you have to get more creative about what those
Right.
pauses are. So we've already named some of what those things might be, like turning off the phone, not checking email, taking the evenings, weekends, 3-day weekends that are natural to really be intentional about that time.
A
So
walk at lunch
all of those
instead of
things, like
working
getting
from your desk. Yeah.
absolutely all of those kinds of options might require a lot more creativity if you don't have a lot of privilege or you don't have paid vacation or you don't have those kinds of things. If you have paid leave, then use it. Like,
Right.
use your paid leave and make sure that you create a plan with your organization that you are clear that while you are on paid leave, that you will be using your paid leave for personal reflection, right? Maybe you don't have to use the word
Meaning
reflection,
you
but
won't be answering emails, you won't
meaning,
be
yes,
answering tasks, you won't be answering calls. You are out during that period
right.
of time.
Yes. And I think so. I've seen this with people that I've worked with and people that I love, that even when we take vacations, we say we're going to not check our email or our
Right.
phone. And yet, when the click or the buzz comes in, we've already created, speaking of, how our brain works, we've created these neural pathways that the
Right.
moment the thing comes in, we need to respond. So even when we say we're not going to do it, we often do it out of habit or just some sense of obligation. So instead of
Right.
making
Yeah.
the goal not checking email, we create the goal, but then we use it as a learning opportunity. So don't beat yourself up the minute that you answer the text or the minute you answer the Slack message, because you probably will.
Mm, yes.
So maybe what it means is you have to leave the phone at home, or maybe it means you have to take a vacation somewhere where there is no internet access, where you can't, maybe you have to set some things in place where you can actually follow through with what you've
So
said
you're
you're going to
talking
do.
about setting boundaries, aren't you?
It's setting structures, really. It's about how do
Structures.
you set
Right.
structures in place to keep you accountable to what you're saying you're going to do.
Yeah.
And then if you're in a place and you do answer the email, don't beat yourself up. Maybe it's an opportunity to learn. What did I just learn about myself? The fact that I just had to do that. Like, what drove me to answer that email? Was I feeling guilty? Was I feeling like, oh, I'm just sitting on the beach and doing nothing else, so I'm
Mm,
not really like feeling productive. So
right.
like answering that email is going to help me feel productive. Like, what is the
Dope
need?
dopamine hit
What is
is
the dopamine
right.
hit that you just got from
Right.
answering it? So rather than beating yourself up, I think you also learn from the situation. Like, why am I doing that? What is it that's driving me to answer this? And I think
Well,
there are
and
guilt, ego.
high performers have a strong FOMO, fear of missing out. They don't want to miss out. They want to be on that train. Part of them wants to be on that train, but that's what burn them out to begin with. And
Right.
so, what does the shift look like then?
Well, and at some point, I think quickly we need to shift to what's the organization's responsibility, because last time we talked about
Right?
systems and what's the system's responsibility to support your people during burnout. And this is a little bit of maybe some transition into that, because every single time someone has set a boundary, maybe not every single time, but many times when people set boundaries, the people around them will honor them up to the moment that they feel stuck. And then they move right back into the
Right.
old pattern, like, oh, it's just one question. I know they said they're on vacation, but I really need their help right now. So I'm just going to call this one time. And what's the first thing that they always say? I am sorry to bother you on your vacation,
Yeah,
but,
right.
right? Okay. So this is part of the culture that even when we set boundaries, that people still feel like they can go ahead and call just this one time if I
Right.
apologize, because that apology then means, like, I acknowledge what I'm doing. And, I also really need your help. So it draws us right back into that same pattern that we were in before. So it's a good transition to start talking about what's the organization's responsibility to create systems in which people don't get burnout in the
Right.
first place.
So some organizations have um, scheduled time, and I'll give some examples. Uh, in For pastors, oftentimes there's a sabbatical that's given, typically every 7 years. Um, that's assuming that 7 year cycle serves the need, but uh, universities with their professors will give sabbaticals that um, are roughly every 7 years, where they go off and do some work and so forth. The purpose of those sabbaticals isn't just for somebody to just go lay on a floaty in a pool and completely check out. It's to give them space to be creative, to give them
Mhm.
space, to not be in the day to day grind, which you talked about in our past conversation. Uh, it it gives them space to refocus on what's important. I was working with a CEO of an organization who um, was the founder CEO of this organization, and he and his leadership team had talked about him taking a sabbatical because of the pace that he was running and the fear that he wasn't creating that space to be creative and to be the best he could be, and he was just grinding and running. And in our coaching discussions we talked about this, and we talked about what it might look like for him to commit to, because he was the ultimate decision maker here, what it would take for him to commit to taking a 3 month sabbatical,
Mhm.
completely unattached.
Mhm.
Let his leadership group lead. And what could he accomplish if he were able to have this space to do things that he wanted to do? This was a hard thing for him. And it was a hard
Mhm.
thing for the organization because he had to be very intentional about taking the time and about creating the boundaries. But as he did, he got that breath that he needed. He got that renewed focus. He was able to write and do some things that he had hoped to do for a while. and his team did just fine. And in
Mhm.
fact, they grew in that new role that they took. The hardest part was coming back and saying, okay, so you all have been in this leadership role now for 3 months, and now I'm coming back into the mix.
Mhm.
What does that look like? And that
Right.
transition has its own challenges, but for him, I think it was life giving. And we see that with professors who take 6 months off every 7 years and go to Italy to work with a colleague. My dad did
Mhm.
that many times over
Uh-huh.
his
Nice.
career. Those were times that allowed him to be renewed, times that allowed him to be creative, times he was still working, but the work was different.
Yeah.
And uh, and it probably allowed him the longevity that he had in that university setting.
So one thing that you're offering is that organizations could offer short-term breaks that are maybe beyond the just normal time off, your normal like leave and things. So maybe you build in breaks. I think the organization's responsibility is then making those breaks easy to take. Organizations are really good at going, oh, like a break would be really good to support our people, or, let's put in a gym, or let's put in, policies around, paying for gym memberships or whatever. Like, let's put all these policies into place, but then they don't make it easy for people to utilize the things that they're putting into place. So, like sabbaticals, short term breaks, even leave, we should make it easy to use.
Right.
So, one thing I think organizations could do, and this would be a suggestion if you're a manager or supervisor and you have somebody that comes to you and says, I'm feeling burnt out. I am feeling like I need a break. I'm overloaded. I'm not at my best. Whatever it is that they say, the
Mm-hmm.
first thing that you do is say, wow, I'm sorry to hear that that's going on. You're a star performer and I want to support you any way that I can. You approach that with non judgment, you acknowledge their experience, and then you help them discover what's the break they can take. And if they decide, I've got like 10 weeks of leave available to me because I haven't used leave in 3 years, which a lot of
Right.
people do is leave their leave on the table.
I'm too
You say,
busy to
okay,
use my leave.
I'm too busy to use leave.
Right.
Maybe it's all right. So you've got this leave. Let's create a plan together so that you can take the time off and truly take the time off. As your
Mm,
manager, what is it that I can do to help support you so that you can take this time off? So maybe it's finding coverage. Maybe it's backfilling the capacity to be able to give them the time off that they need.
right.
Maybe it's protecting them every time someone on the team is like, I know they're on leave, but I should
Hmm.
just call them. And maybe the manager's like, no, we're not going to call them. We're going to figure this out ourselves. So organizations are great at giving perks and setting policies and creating opportunities, but do we actually support people to take advantage of them? I don't know that we do that very well in organizations.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's pivot a little bit and specifically talk about coaching. Because
Okay.
you and I have coached a lot of people between us. Uh, we've experienced clients who have either been in stages of burnout or have completely burned out. Um, and what do those conversations typically look like and sound like? And what value is this partnership to helping to resolve that?
I think it looks different in every conversation, and sometimes it's about I alluded to this earlier in coaching. What coaching is really good at is reflecting back to you what you yet don't yet see,
Right,
which might be I just noticed during this conversation, you've used the word exhausted 7 times.
right.
what does it mean that you've just used the word exhausted 7 times? Tell me more about exhaustion. Maybe it's
What does
every
that look like or feel like to you?
What does it look like? What does it feel like?
Right.
What is the impact of your exhaustion on your effectiveness in your organization? What's the impact of your exhaustedness on your exhaustion on your team? So it's in some ways it's noticing and mirroring back,
Mm,
acknowledging the experience. It might be, I notice that every time you talk about this project, you are like closing yourself off and you just like your whole body gets really tense. What's it like for me to give that back to you? Like, what are you experiencing when I say that? What are you thinking about or feeling as you're describing this project? Because I'm noticing a pattern. So maybe it's a pattern of words, maybe it's a pattern of body language, maybe it's a pattern of facial expressions.
right.
Something coaches are really good at listening to all of the information that's coming in and being able to give that back to you so that you can see
Right.
yourself through someone else's eyes. We don't make judgment about that. We don't make interpretations about it, but we offer it and then offer you to reflect on it and see if there's anything there that might be important. Maybe it's I notice that your face lights up every time you talk
Yeah,
about
right.
XYZ. So tell me about that. Like when you talk about this happens when you talk about this, your face lights up. Tell me about that. Like what's
Mm,
what's going on? What does that tell you? So that reflection back with non-judgment and curiosity with no intention of fixing anything. It's just understanding is so valuable because most people in our life don't listen like that. Most people listen because they are trying to respond or they're trying to build connection with you.
right.
As coaches, we want to connect and we want it to be a safe environment, but connection is not our primary responsibility. Our primary responsibility is to help you get where you want to go and to be able to offer you reflection and non judgment to be able to get where you want to go. And that's why I think coaching is so incredibly valuable. So I think it's that reflection back, but it's also then this question that you offered earlier about impact. So
Yes.
when that's happening, what's the impact? Is that what you're intending or not? And if not, then what do you need to do in order to get closer to what you want your impact to be? So it's both reflection, non-judgment, curiosity, but then it's also defining what do you want at the end of this path and how do we get you closer to what it is you're looking for rather than you sort of getting off track and going in a direction that
Right.
you didn't intend to go in the first place.
One thing we do as coaches is we create space to allow for them to reflect, for them to do that hard work of asking themselves the question, am I on the right path? Do I have the right kind of boundaries? Am I seeing the things that I need to see in myself? Am I making the impact I want to make? All of
Mhm.
these questions. And for anybody in the workforce, but certainly the high performers, it's hard to slow down enough to do that. And so,
Absolutely.
inside of a coaching session where that space is created, you have the opportunity to have that kind of reflection with a partner who is noticing, who is paying attention, who is listening, who is non judgmental, who is safe, who is there only to help you be the best you can possibly be. That's what
Absolutely.
our role is.
Absolutely. And the other thing coaches do is they are 100% present with you in that conversation.
We hope
It's
to be.
not a, it's not about us. It's not about what we
Right.
want. It's not about our judgments. It's not about us. And that's the difference between a coaching conversation and every other kind of conversation that we typically have, because most of the time people are listening through their own lens, through their own self interest, through their own desire to connect, through their own goals, through
Mm,
their own experiences. So then they start offering advice or they start telling you what they would do, or they a lot of times they take away what you're experiencing and then they put the spotlight back on themselves, which
Yeah.
is not helpful. And it's in this kind of a conversation. We need those too. Like we need all of those kinds of conversations. But coaching is a space where the spotlight is completely and totally on you. And our goal is to get you where you want to go.
Yeah.
And so, because we're
Sure.
holding your intention for you and we've defined that with you, we're also not afraid to ask the hard questions, to give you the hard reflection, to give you the real unvarnished what we're experiencing so that you can use that. I think our friends, our partners, our mentors even are like, you go, like you're amazing, like you're
Hmm.
doing nothing wrong, like you're doing everything right, and everyone around you is doing things wrong.
Yeah.
Coaches don't
Cheerleaders.
hold that,
Yeah. Right.
right? We're not necessarily cheerleaders, although we might be
Right.
once in a while, but that's
Sure.
not our primary job either. Our primary job is to help you get where you want to go. And whatever that's going to take, also in safety and presence and non-judgment and curiosity. It's a different kind of conversation and a different kind of work.
So back to the person who is suffering burnout or has burned out. Um, what are some kind of narrowing it down to some key tips? Well, one of them is have a partner involved.
Mhm.
We think that having a coach can truly be helpful to creating that space where you can begin to move in the right direction, to where you can reset, where you can um, explore and perhaps take that pause, right? What are some other tips that we can give people who are experiencing that?
Yeah. Well, I also think it could be if coaching or getting a coach is not possible for you for whatever reason,
Yeah.
having building an intentional network of support
Yep.
throughout your career before you need them is ideal. Like when you get into the workplace, we should always be deliberately creating what you might call a career board of directors, a network of support, people around you that you can
Yeah.
turn to. And as you're cultivating this network of support, they should not just be people who think like you. You need people who think differently than you. If you're a detail person, you need a big picture person. If you are a direct person, you need somebody who's emphasizing empathy more than directness. You need a people around you who think differently than you because those people are going to challenge you. If you put people on your board of directors who think just like you, they're just going to tell you you're amazing and that you're doing all the right things. That's not really that helpful. So when we get to a place where we might be burnout and we might be trying to set some boundaries and navigate through some things, we have some choices about who's the partner we're going to go to and say, I
Yeah.
need you. In this meeting, I always step in and I always am the first to raise my hand. And I need you to help me not do that. I am asking for your
Right.
help. Kick me under the table, like say, step in before I answer and say, I'd love to see somebody who's not stepped up for a while, step up and do some, like if you could create some space for me, kick me under the table, give me some feedback afterwards, whatever it is, like that sort of accountability partner or network of support, I think is another way to do that.
Yeah. The other thing, and you mentioned this earlier, and I think it's an incredible tip, is pay attention to the feedback you are getting. Slow yourself down enough to truly hear that feedback. Listen to it to understand, to learn, as opposed to what our initial reaction might be is to be offended by it or to
Hmm.
be distracted by it or something of that nature. Listen to the feedback that's there from your boss, from your spouse, from your coworker, from your friend, from your neighbor. the people that know you best who can say, you're showing up differently right now. What's going on?
Mhm.
And instead of saying, well, nothing's going on, settle back into that and say, describe what you mean by differently so I can understand.
Yeah,
And all of a sudden, that new feedback, that new information gives you an insight to yourself that perhaps you're not seeing without that person close to you. So pay attention to the feedback.
absolutely. Absolutely. I think again, like I don't want to leave this conversation
Hmm,
putting all the responsibility on the individual because we were
sure.
really clear in our last conversation that systems benefit many times from people's desire to do really good work. And when profit is the motive
Mm,
or customer satisfaction is the motive, those systems benefit from high performers who are willing to do anything that they can. And so we need to
yeah.
know the water that we're entering in the first place.
Hmm,
And even if systems don't want to operate that way, there is great incentive to really leverage high performers, leverage employees, and work them to the bone. It's just the system is incentivized to do that. And so I think for us thinking about like if you're a manager or supervisor, or if you're an employer, what are your responsibilities? And I was just thinking about some tips. Like if you're actually a manager or supervisor, having conversations with people when you notice that they might be burnout, like thinking about that as part of your role, is your role as a manager or supervisor is to maximize the capacity of the team that you have and
right,
do it in a way, I think, with a little bit of compassion and empathy. If you don't add compassion and empathy in this equation, you're just going to use people and send them out the door. And that feels cruel to me. And I don't think most of
right.
us start out to be cruel. But I think, if you're noticing something going on, have a conversation. I'm noticing that you're answering emails all hours of the night and day. I'm noticing that you're getting a little short with the people around you. Whatever it is. I'm wondering what's going on. So tell me a little bit about how you're doing. Like making that conversation routine
Mm,
so that it just doesn't come out of the blue. Maybe you build it into every conversation that you're having with your people on the scale of your workload. How are you doing? How are you managing it? How are you feeling about that? Is there any support that you need? Is there anything that we can take off your plate or that you could say no to? Being a constantly supportive manager, I think, can be helpful. Um,
Let me add to that just briefly. I
Please.
know you're on a run here, but
Yeah.
the we talk about managing people, and one of the key elements of managing people is to invest in our people that we manage. We invest in them in a lot of different ways. We invest in them through training, we invest in them through time, we invest with them through listening. Uh, and in this case, we possibly are investing in them to not only understand the path that they're on, but we're investing in them of being that third party voice that can help them adjust and get on the right path for them.
Absolutely.
And so
And
think in terms of investment, that is
yes,
our job, is to invest in our people so they can perform at the highest level they possibly can. And when we don't invest in them, they don't reach that potential.
I agree. And I also the more I do this work, the more triggered I get by the word performance.
Mm,
Like human beings are not just a performance metric. They are human beings first and they are
yeah,
performers second.
yeah,
If we only look at people's performance, if we only look at them in regards to their performance, we are losing the human being who is behind the
right.
performance. And if we invest in the way that you're talking about and we invest in them as a human being first, the performance will come because we develop loyalty, we develop capacity, we develop compassion along the way. And so I do get a little bit triggered by this word performance because
Yeah,
we are much more than a performance metric. And on that note, you were sort of alluded to this, but I want to name it. As a manager or supervisor, you play multiple roles to your people. So part of it is this investment in them as a person, as an employee, but part of it's an advocate for them too. So
sure.
your responsibility might be, oh, I'm seeing this employee over here is overloaded and the expectations on them is way too great. My responsibility is to advocate for them for at the level above me or the level above that,
Hmm.
to say our system is not designed to get the outcome that you're looking for. We're putting all the pressure on one person, and it really should not lay at the hands of one person. So the responsibility
Yeah,
might then be to advocate in the system, or to be able to advocate for people to say no to things. So you run interference, you advocate, you clear the path so that your people can get their best that they can be the best at what they do, right? So as a manager or supervisor, it's not just your investment in your people. It's sometimes you have to advocate to them to other parts of the organization,
sure.
or say, or like use your authority to give them some
Mm,
permission to not to be able to say no to some things while some other things become a
sure.
priority. So there are lots of roles that you play, that I think are also important to think about.
Yeah, I agree. Let's wrap this up. What are a handful of things you hope our listeners will walk away with?
Yeah, I do hope the listeners walk away, if you're somebody who is feeling burnt out, that there is hope, for one, that there is hope, that being intentional can give you hope to change things. But it might also take some courage. It might take some courage on your
Hmm.
behalf to change
Yeah,
things, to set boundaries, to get clear that you're in a place that is not consistent with your values, that you're not living your values. It takes courage to
right.
step in and say, I am not living with the intention that as the human being that I want to be. That might take some courage. And so I hope people feel hope, but I also hope that employers, managers and supervisors and people who are responsible for people and organizations also see themselves as responsible, that this is not an individual issue. It's about how the system is set up. And to show true leadership, we need to be thinking about how do we support people. So if you're an individual, it's not your fault that you're burnt out. You may be contributing to it because you're a high performer, because you're ego driven, because you don't want to admit defeat. You don't want this job to break you, whatever it is. Like we all have our reasons why we drive
Sure.
that
Yeah.
we might have to wrestle with internally. And that's part of the courage as well. But it's not a personal failure. It is a systemic failure. We live in a culture and in organizations that leverage this desire for us to do well. So it's complex. And I don't want people to walk away feeling like they're a personal failure. I want them to feel like there's hope and there are steps that they can
Right.
take. But I also want organizations and all the people within them to take some responsibility for creating spaces in which people can do their best work and not burn them out at the end of the day.
Yeah. Very good. Well, very well said as well. Um, a takeaway I want people to have, or some takeaways for me, um, if you're feeling the symptoms of burnout or you're feeling burnout, take a look at the path that you're on. How clear is the goal? Is that really the path you want to be on? And this is an opportunity to pause and to adjust and to get more clarity around the path you want to be on. And that intentional movement can oftentimes put you on a path toward uh, recovering from burnout, because one of the elements of burnout is um, you lose sight of the purpose. You lose sight of the purpose. You're just grinding every day. And by changing that path, and you need help sometimes to change that path, but by changing that path and becoming much more clear about your purpose and where you want to go, that will put you on a road that will be very healthy for you. You do need partners around you. Those partners can come in a lot of forms. We hope that perhaps one of those partners can be a coach. That coach can come beside you, can create that space, can listen to you objectively, can ask you questions that other people wouldn't normally ask you, and create that ability for you to increase your awareness and perspective to be able to move forward in a healthier way. So if you're listening out there and you're experiencing some of this, reach out to us. We'd love to help you talk through some of this and work through this. We're coaches, and this is what we do. And go to the adastracoachalliance.com and reach out. We would love to hear from you. And we appreciate you listening to this 3-segment thing on burnout. If for some reason you only tuned in to this segment, please listen to episode 31, 32, and 33, because they all work together in terms of trying to build a picture around what burnout is and what we can do about it. We appreciate you listening. And Teresa, thank you.
Yeah, thank you too. Great conversation. Thanks, Andy.
Thank you for joining us on Growth Beyond Boundaries. We hope today's episode gave you the inspiration and tools to push past limits and achieve meaningful growth. If you enjoyed this episode, we'd love for you to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with your network. Your support helps us reach more people on their growth journeys. Remember, growth starts with one step, one conversation, and one decision to go beyond boundaries. Until next time, keep challenging the limits and discovering your potential. See you soon.